This is Cybersecurity HQ, your daily news report for November 21st, 2024. We've got a lot to get through today, so let's jump right into the latest cybersecurity news.
It really is a whirlwind out there. Today's deep dive is going to highlight just how rapidly the threat landscape is evolving. Nation-state attacks, financially motivated cybercrime, vulnerabilities.
Let's start with some concerning news about Palo Alto Network's firewalls. The Shadow Server Foundation reported that roughly 2,000 of these firewalls were found to be vulnerable.
Yeah, and it is a bit concerning because even though we've seen a decrease in the number of internet-exposed firewalls overall, attackers are getting faster at finding and exploiting these vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities in question are CVE 2024-00014 and CVE 2024-9474. They were chained together in attacks targeting the management interfaces of these firewalls.
In this incident, which has been dubbed Operation Lunar Peak, primarily targeted devices in the US and India.
Right. And the actors behind these attacks, well, they are still unknown. So the first vulnerability enables authentication bypass, which, let's be honest, is a serious flaw, allowing attackers to gain access without proper credentials. Then the second vulnerability allows attackers to gain root privileges, essentially giving them full control over the compromised system.
Palo Alto Networks has released patches for the affected PAN-OS versions and indicators of compromise.
And this incident really highlights how important securing management interfaces is. Even with a strong security system, you leave that management interface vulnerable, and it's like giving attackers a backdoor to the whole system.
It's a reminder that every component of your security infrastructure needs to be locked down.
Absolutely. And this also brings up a crucial point about the challenges of attributing cyber attacks. I mean, pinpointing the perpetrators, especially when we are talking about these sophisticated attackers who are using things like front companies to hide their origins.
Well, speaking of front companies, Sentinel just released a report detailing how North Korean hackers are establishing front companies that mimic legitimate US IT firms.
Yeah. These front companies, they allow these hackers to secure remote work positions with a big chunk of their earnings funneled back to North Korea.
So essentially, they are bypassing international sanctions and funding their weapons programs.
Exactly.
It's a pretty clever tactic that exploits this rise of remote work, making it even harder to detect their malicious activities.
Yeah, and they've even gone as far as to create websites that look almost identical to legitimate firms, like inditechlab.com, to make themselves look more credible.
Despite efforts to shut down these operations, Sentinel found that some of these front companies, including Shenyang Hugo Technology Ltd., are still operating.
Which just shows you how persistent these threat actors are. And it kind of leads us to another example of cybercriminals adapting their tactics, node stealer malware. It was originally this JavaScript-based threat.
Now it's transformed into a Python-based stealer with, more advanced capabilities targeting Facebook Ads Manager accounts.
Researchers have seen it stealing credit card details stored in web browsers. It basically unlocks browser databases using the Windows Restart Manager.
So they are exploiting legitimate system features for malicious purposes.
Right. Node Stealer also steals cookies to generate Facebook access tokens, which gives it the ability to take over accounts for malicious activities.
Moving on now, we have news regarding Citrix session recording vulnerabilities. Two new vulnerabilities, CVE 2024-8068 and CVE 2024-8069, have been disclosed. And researchers are saying they could potentially be more serious than Citrix initially indicated.
Yeah, because these vulnerabilities could allow for privilege escalation and limited remote code execution, and we are already seeing reports of attempts to exploit them.
What's interesting here is the discrepancy between Citrix's assessment and what security researchers have actually found.
Right. So Citrix labeled these vulnerabilities as medium severity, saying that exploitation requires attackers to be on the same domain as the session recording server. But researchers have found evidence suggesting that these vulnerabilities might be exploitable remotely.
Which obviously raises concerns about the potential risk to a wider range of organizations.
Absolutely.
It seems like there's always a new vulnerability being discovered and exploited. Speaking of which, MITRE recently updated its list of the top 25 most dangerous software weaknesses for 2024. And there have been some notable changes, which I think offer really valuable insights for both developers and security teams.
Yeah, definitely. And this year, cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, or XSS as they are known, they've climbed to the top spot, surpassing out-of-bounds write flaws, which are now number 2.
XSS has been around forever. It's interesting how it remains a significant issue for developers.
It really just emphasizes how important secure coding practices are, and that developers need to stay up to date on the latest security vulnerabilities.
And on top of the change at the top, This year's list includes a couple of new entries.
Right. So we are now seeing exposure of sensitive information and uncontrolled resource consumption on the list. And these additions really reflect, I think, the evolving threat landscape and the increased focus on protecting data.
And a really critical concern that continues to grow is the exposure of industrial control systems. A recent report by Census revealed that over 145,000 ICS are exposed to the internet globally.
It's a huge number, and this exposure is a significant risk to critical infrastructure. We're talking about power grids, water treatment plants, and manufacturing facilities.
The consequences of a successful attack on these systems could be huge. We could see disruptions in essential services or even physical damage.
And it's important to remember that a lot of these systems operate on outdated software with, to be frank, inadequate security measures, making them easy targets.
So we've talked a lot about the negative. Let's touch on some positive developments.
Yeah.
Sentinel just revealed their new AI security posture management capabilities.
This is big. These new features are designed specifically to secure AI services.
It's encouraging to see companies like Sentinel proactively addressing the security challenges of emerging technologies. And speaking of companies making big moves in the security space, Wiz, a cloud security company, just acquired Dazz.
Yeah, for a cool $450 million, Dazz specializes in AI-powered cloud security remediation. So Wiz is going to get a pretty substantial boost in their ability to find and fix vulnerabilities.
This move really highlights the importance of automated remediation, especially in cloud environments.
Well, the complexity of these environments is growing rapidly with cloud adoption accelerating.
It's making it much harder for security teams to stay on top of things. So AI-powered solutions offer a way to streamline vulnerability remediation.
Right, cutting down the time it takes to fix vulnerabilities. Now remember, the widespread disruption caused by the CrowdStrike Falcon sensor crash earlier this year.
Yeah, it impacted a lot of organizations, showing how important it is to have robust recovery mechanisms in place.
Well, Microsoft has announced a new tool called Quick Machine Recovery. It's designed to allow IT admins to do targeted fixes via Windows Update.
Even when machines are unbootable.
Exactly. Which means they can address critical issues remotely without needing to physically intervene.
That's going to make recovery much faster and more efficient.
Right, and this is all part of Microsoft's effort to improve kernel security. They want to prevent similar outages from happening again. Now, the RSA conference announced something that could really impact the startup ecosystem.
RSA is always a big event in cybersecurity. What's changing?
Starting next year, they are going to require all Innovation Sandbox finalists to have a $5 million investment.
A $5 million investment?
Yeah. It'll be in the form of an uncapped SAFE from affiliates of Crosspoint, the private equity firm that owns the RSA conference.
While it's great they want to give finalists more resources, I do wonder about the impact this will have on smaller startups who might not be looking for that kind of investment so early on.
It's certainly a bold move that could change things for cybersecurity startups. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Now let's look globally. The World Internet Conference in Fujian, China, recently wrapped up, and cybersecurity was a major theme. One of the key takeaways was the focus on using AI to combat increasingly sophisticated cyber threats.
It seems like AI is front and center at every major security event.
It's definitely becoming increasingly important.
Well, Key Engson Technology Group, a Chinese cybersecurity firm, actually received the Distinguished Contribution Award at the conference, highlighting their growing influence globally. And on that note, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity released their National Cyber Threat Assessment for 2025-2026.
What are some of the key takeaways from that assessment?
The report really emphasizes the persistent threat of ransomware, especially how critical infrastructure is increasingly being targeted. They are also highlighting how state-sponsored attacks are becoming more sophisticated.
How so?
Well, these attacks often include online information warfare tactics, aiming to manipulate public opinion and stir up social unrest.
So the threats are not just technological, but they also extend to how information is used and perceived by the public.
Absolutely. And the Canadian government is investing serious resources to strengthen cyber defenses, which I think is a good reminder for everyone to be proactive and vigilant about cybersecurity. Speaking of which, the U.S. Department of Justice just took action against the cybercrime group Scattered Spider, charging 5 alleged members.
Scattered Spider is a notorious group, phishing campaigns, data theft, crypto heists. They've been linked to several high-profile breaches.
Yeah, including that attack on MGM Resorts back in 2023.
It's a win for law enforcement, and it shows that even in cyberspace, criminals can be held accountable.
Now let's turn to the healthcare sector. New cybersecurity regulations will soon be in effect for hospitals in New York State.
Given the sensitivity of patient data, this is certainly an area of interest. What do these new regulations entail?
So these regulations, put in place by the New York State Department of Health, are pretty strict. Hospitals have to enhance their protection of protected health information and personally identifiable information. And these regulations go beyond HIPAA requirements. They're requiring hospitals to establish comprehensive cybersecurity programs, conduct regular risk assessments, and even appoint a chief information security officer.
It's good to see that focus on protecting data,
Hmm.
especially in such a critical sector like healthcare.
These new regulations definitely align with the proposed updates to the HIPAA security rule announced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It's a clear sign that stronger cybersecurity measures are needed in the healthcare industry. It's a positive step, for sure, especially when you think about how much sensitive information is handled in healthcare. And talking about industry trends, we are seeing a ton of mergers and acquisitions happening as companies try to offer these more comprehensive solutions.
What are some of the notable ones you've come across?
Well, you've got BitSight. They acquired CybersecSkill to really beef up their third-party risk management capabilities. And then Enable bought Adlumin. They are focusing on strengthening their managed detection and response and SIEM capabilities. Oh, and Silverfort acquired Idaptive, which boosts their identity threat detection and response capabilities.
So it seems like companies are recognizing they need to offer a broader range of services if they want to address this increasingly complex threat landscape.
Exactly. It's all about creating more, integrated and robust solutions. But we do need to be careful. It's important to balance all this consolidation with innovation, right? We've got to make sure smaller companies can still compete and that the industry stays, dynamic, responsive to these evolving threats.
Speaking of dynamic companies, let's look at some cybersecurity stocks worth watching.
Oh, definitely. CrowdStrike, Sentinel-Alone, Zscaler, they're all doing some really interesting things. CrowdStrike, even after that outage earlier this year, they are still a major player in endpoint security, and their financials are strong. Sentinel-Alone, with their AI-driven approach to threat detection, they're showing impressive growth. And then you've got Zscaler. They specialize in zero-trust architecture. They're well-positioned to benefit from that growing adoption.
It's a good mix of established players and those up-and-comers, all shaping the future of cybersecurity. And speaking of shaping the future, Kevin Dukas, a professor at Syracuse University, he's doing great work training that next generation of cybersecurity pros.
His seed labs, they're amazing. They give students hands-on experience by simulating real-world cyber attacks and defenses. It's so practical, equips them with the skills they need to actually hit the ground running in this field.
His work is so important, especially with this ongoing cybersecurity skills gap. We need to make sure there are enough talented professionals coming up. Now let's look at the government sector, specifically Booz Allen Hamilton.
They were just recognized as the top federal cybersecurity provider by GovWin from Deltek, and they are projected to reach $2.8 billion in cyber revenue by fiscal year 2025.
That's impressive. What's driving their success?
Well, they're strategically focused on a few key areas: strategic cyber dominance, zero trust, and AI transformation, securing those cyber physical systems, and quantum preparedness.
It's encouraging to see companies like Booz Allen Hamilton taking on these complex challenges. And speaking of taking on challenges, Palo Alto Networks seems to be benefiting from their move toward platformization.
They've been really pushing that integrated and comprehensive approach to security.
So how is that strategy playing out for them?
Well, in their last earnings call, they reported a huge increase in platform deals and strong financial performance overall.
So consolidating their security offerings into a single platform seems to be resonating with customers.
And that trend towards platformization, we are seeing it across the whole industry. Customers want solutions that are streamlined, that can handle the growing complexity of the threat landscape. And going back to mergers and acquisitions, we talked about it before, but there's another aspect I wanted to bring up.
What are you thinking about?
The acquisition of Dazz by Wiz was big news, but there have been some other interesting acquisitions lately too, like Enable acquired this company called Adlumin, and it's a big deal because Adlumin specializes in MDR, that's managed detection and response, and also SIEM, security information, and event management. Those are critical areas for organizations trying to strengthen their security posture.
It's like the cybersecurity landscape is constantly changing, with companies merging, acquiring, adapting their offerings so quickly. It's a reminder that we need to stay informed and adapt with these changes.
You're exactly right. Another acquisition that I thought was interesting was BitSight. The company known for security ratings, they just acquired Cybersecurity.
I know BitSight, but what does Cybersecurity bring to the table?
They are all about threat intelligence. They gather info from the deep and dark web, analyzing threats, giving insights so organizations can understand their risk landscape better. So this acquisition really helps BitSight in a crucial area, third-party risk management.
Which is becoming more and more important these days with how interconnected everything is. Understanding the risks associated with third-party vendors and partners.
Definitely. And one more acquisition I want to mention is Silverfort, a company focused on identity threat detection and response. They acquired Idaptive.
Idaptive, they specialize in identity and access management, right?
Yep. So this acquisition makes Silverfort stronger in the identity security market. They can offer a more complete solution for protecting against identity-related threats. Now, let's move on to something more positive. We talked about Kevin Dew's Seed Labs, but there's another development I think is worth highlighting.
What's that?
The University of Calgary, they got a ton of funding for cybersecurity research.
Oh, how much?
Almost $7 million from the National Cybersecurity Consortium. They are going to be supporting 8 different research projects.
That's fantastic. What kind of research will they be doing?
They're going to explore some cutting-edge solutions, things like AI-driven detection tools, and even secure quantum communications.
It's great to see investment in cybersecurity research, especially in areas that are so important for the future. And speaking of the future, let's talk more about AI in cybersecurity. We've touched on it throughout the conversation, but it's really transformative.
Oh, it is. AI is being integrated into so many cybersecurity solutions. Threat detection, response, security automation, you name it.
And it makes sense, right? AI can analyze huge amounts of data, identify patterns, detect anomalies that humans would miss.
Exactly. And that's essential in today's threat landscape because attackers are constantly changing their techniques. But it is a double-edged sword. AI can be used for good, but it can also be used maliciously.
So how do we make sure AI is used responsibly?
Well, the development and deployment of AI in cybersecurity has to be ethical and responsible. We have to make sure these powerful technologies are enhancing security, not undermining it. It can cover the costs associated with incident response, data recovery, legal fees, and those regulatory fines.
It seems like cybersecurity insurance is becoming more and more crucial for all sorts of organizations.
Definitely. Especially as cyber attacks keep getting more frequent and sophisticated, that potential financial hit can be massive. So cybersecurity insurance can help organizations mitigate those risks and bounce back faster from an incident.
Speaking of recovering from incidents, let's dive a little deeper into incident response planning.
Yeah, having a solid incident response plan is so important for any organization, no matter the size. You need a plan that lays out the steps to take if a cybersecurity incident happens, from detection and containment all the way to recovery and how you're going to communicate about it.
What are some of the key ingredients of a really effective incident response plan?
Well, first off, you have to have those roles and responsibilities clearly defined. Who is in charge of what? Who needs to be looped in? Having a definite chain of command is going to help streamline things when you're in a crisis.
That makes sense. Things can get super chaotic during an incident, so having that predetermined structure can help keep things in order.
Exactly. Then you've got to have a communication plan. Who needs to be kept in the loop and how are you going to do it? This includes everyone internally, external partners, customers, even law enforcement.
And that clear, timely communication is vital during a cybersecurity incident. It can help manage expectations and prevent too much damage to your reputation.
For sure. And of course, you need those technical procedures. How are you going to contain the threat? How do you recover that data? These procedures need to be documented and tested regularly to make sure they work.
That testing part is key. You don't want to find out your plan isn't up to snuff when you're in the middle of a real incident.
Exactly. And a part that often gets overlooked is the post-incident review. After you've gone through an incident, you have to take the time to break down what happened, see what you can learn from it, and then update the plan based on those lessons learned.
So incident response is really this continuous process of getting better and better.
You got it. It's not just a static document. It needs to be something that evolves and changes as the threat landscape changes and as your organization's needs change.
Let's shift gears for a second and talk about the human side of cybersecurity. We've covered a lot of tech stuff and processes, but people play a huge role in both causing and preventing these cyber incidents.
Oh, absolutely. The weakest link in any security system is often us, humans. I mean, we've all heard about those phishing attacks and social engineering where those attackers use psychology to trick people into giving up sensitive information or downloading malware.
So what can organizations do to address this human element?
Security awareness training is huge. Employees need to know about the different kinds of threats, how to spot them, what to do if they get a suspicious email or go to a sketchy website.
But it can't just be about training, right?
Yeah.
It's also about making that culture of security where everybody gets that they play a part in protecting sensitive information.
For sure. It's about creating that mindset where security is everyone's responsibility, not just the IT department's problem.
And when we talk about responsibility, we should talk about the role of leadership in all this. What can CEOs and other executives do to make their organization's security stronger?
Well, the biggest thing is they have to make cybersecurity a top priority. It's not just a tech issue. It's a business risk that needs to be managed from the top down.
So it's about giving it the resources, making it clear that it's important, making sure security is built into every part of the business.
Exactly. Leaders have to show their commitment to security in what they do and what they say, and they have to hold their teams accountable for using strong security practices.
Leading by example, basically, creating that culture where security is valued.
Exactly. Now let's zoom out a bit. We've talked about the risks to businesses and governments, but what about how this impacts individuals?
I think it's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by all the news about breaches and attacks. What can people do to protect themselves?
There are actually some pretty simple things everyone can do to make themselves safer online. First off, strong passwords. And don't use the same password for everything.
We hear that all the time, but you'd be surprised how many people still use weak or easy-to-guess passwords.
It's true. Another big one is being careful about phishing emails and those websites that look a little fishy. Don't click links or open attachments if you don't know the sender, and be careful about sites that ask you for personal information.
It's all about being skeptical, thinking twice before you click on something that looks too good to be true.
Exactly. And finally, keep your software updated. Your operating system, your web browser, all the apps you use regularly. Updates usually have security patches to fix vulnerabilities and keep you protected.
It's like locking your doors and windows, a small step that makes a big difference.
Exactly. So let's change gears again. What are some of the emerging trends in cybersecurity that you're keeping an eye on? The things that keep you up at night?
One thing that worries me is how sophisticated artificial intelligence is becoming and how it could be misused.
AI is powerful, but it can be used for good or bad. As AI systems get more and more advanced, there's that risk they'll be used to create cyber weapons that are even more dangerous.
It's like a race, and the bad guys are getting faster.
That's a good way to put it. Another trend I'm watching is the rise of quantum computing.
I've heard about that. It can revolutionize a lot of industries, but it's also a big threat to cybersecurity.
Right. Quantum computers might be able to break the encryption that protects our sensitive information today.
So we need to be thinking about quantum-resistant cryptography now if we want to be ready for the future.
Exactly. And lastly, I'm worried about how interconnected everything is becoming and how that creates a bigger attack surface.
The Internet of Things, all those connected devices, that's a lot of ways for attackers to get in.
Right. We have to change how we think about security in this kind of world. Protecting individual devices or networks isn't enough. We have to be more holistic, look at the whole ecosystem.
It's a big challenge, for sure, but one we have to face head-on if we want a more secure digital future.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive for today.
It has been a whirlwind tour of the cybersecurity landscape. Hopefully our listeners found it helpful.
We covered so much ground, from those vulnerabilities and exploits to the threat actors and attacks to industry trends, company news.
The challenges, the opportunities, how this whole field is constantly evolving.
And how important collaboration and education are, that commitment to building a more secure digital world.
Before we go, I wanted to remind our listeners about the amazing community we have here at Cybersecurity HQ.
With over 70,000 cybersecurity professionals, our platform has a ton of resources, in-depth reports, job postings, or weekly newsletter to keep you up to date on everything.
Come join us. Be a part of the conversation.
So until next time, stay vigilant, stay informed, and keep that curiosity alive.
And remember, the learning never stops.